Welcome to Technique Friday. Now I've had quite a few requests after my colour blending series to continue it on, but in flesh tones. Now one thing I want to say before I start this lesson is that flesh tone is really up to you. It is a matter of personal preference, and I have some flesh tints that I have mixed up, and they are really quite pale. I also have invested in a lot of flesh tones, and I've actually made that flesh tint into a glaze, so I have a little bit of it in there that you can see. And glazes are used to build up layers that are translucent. So there are a lot of different ways that you can build up flesh tones, and depending on the way that you want to approach it or the type of paper you're using will determine the way that you do your flesh. So there's a lot of times where I just continue to use single colours and layer upon layer them to get that deep kind of flesh tone. There are other times where I use my flesh tint over the top of pencils and things like that. The phone always seems to ring, I tell you. Gosh. In the middle of a lesson. Right, so the flesh tones. So now I have, and look, to be honest with you, I really love Jo Sonia's range of flesh tones and flesh light tones. But I also have, when I went searching for different types of paints to actually use for flesh, there's a big range. Really big range. And there is quite a lot that I use in all of my flesh tones depending on what sort of hint that I want. So when you are actually deciding that you want to embark on flesh, there's this method, and this is just straight paint. But I often use a combination of paint and Neocolor crayons, and also Prismacolor pencils, and sometimes watercolor and Inktense pencils as well. And I find that that being able to use a number of different media can build up different styles and techniques. And there's different ways that you can mix these things as well. So I'll just show you a few of these basic things. The whole basic thing that you want to think about is what kind of flesh tone do you actually want. So I'm just going to draw a rough face. And I'll just bring that in so that we can have a look at the face. So I'm just going to draw one of my like whimsy faces. Okay, so what we're really looking for here is just the shading. So I put some basic features in here so that you can get a bit of an idea of how we look at shading a face. And it depends partly on where your light's coming from, as well as a number of other different factors like, you know, are they a darker skin person, lighter skin person, are they sunburnt, are they flushed? You know, you can show emotions through skin. So, yeah. Right. So, I'm just going to show you a basic way that I'm just going to have a look. Now, two colours that I would recommend if you're in Australia particularly is unbleached titanium and skin tone based light. Now, I also love, this is a Louvre, and I found this actually in Spotlight. So this is in Australia, but you might be able to get this brand, but this is very peachy. So some of the other pinks that I've got skin tone light, not quite as peachy, it's more pink. And I'll just do, like I've got my face here, but just here, I'm going to just swatch a few, just so that you can have a little bit of a look and to see the sort of starting tones that you get. So an unbleached titanium is to titanium white that's not bleached yet, because when you mix in your white, It's actually bleached. So, and this is the skin tone base, and my lids are all gummed up. This just gives you an idea of the different tonings as you look at them. Right? Now, just as I'm putting that lid back on, it was gummed up with paint. They're two basic colours that I absolutely always love to start with. Now, there are, if you like pinker tones, then this particular colour is really nice for peachy pink tones. You can see it's quite a contrast there. And then there are things like, this is a transparent yellow oxide, and I also have an Australian sienna, but you can also use a raw umber, but these are transparent. So these are things that we can use for shading, and it depends too on how yellow or not yellow you really want. This is another, it's gold oxide. Now when you're doing gold oxides and things, yellow ochres, you need to seriously have a look at how yellow you want your skin to be. And unless you want your ladies to look a little bit Asian, with those Asian yellowy skin tones, then I strongly suggest that you need to think a lot about how you want that flesh done. Now this is really yellow. What a nice buttery yellow that is, and that can give some real life and light into an otherwise kind of sometimes matte and dull shade. And of course I'm going to use a little bit here of antique white. So you can use white, but I'm going to use some antique white here. And that's just a cream. And you can see that there. So it looks a little bit yellow based on the white paper here. So when I'm starting to look at a face, the first thing I'll do is seal it. And I often will use a small filbert brush to fill in faces. So the first thing I'll do is seal it, and I'll seal it in a light pale colour because that's how I like to work. Now if you're working on thin paper, right, and I'll just go over the whole thing for that, because remember this is all about layers. And you know, you've just got to set something down so that you can work upon it. Now there's a couple of schools of thought about the way that you work, and when you get more and more confident you will just blend on the page. I tend to work in layers and then blend as well when the layers aren't quite dry. And I have not prepped this page with gesso. And I'm just popping that over now. So I'm just showing this in paint, but be aware that if you've got neo colours or pencils, you can start this process a different way altogether. And you can have a look to see, she looks now very flat, but she's got her first layer down. And we let that dry. That's the first sealing layer, and I just always let that layer dry so that I'm not mixing on the palette before I do something else. So I'll be back shortly. Okay, so that first layer is dry. Now the next thing that I like to do then is put my darker shadows in. So if I'm going to put some darker shadows in, you can choose to go something like that flesh tone in the Jo Sonia, okay, so that skin tone base, or you can go something a little bit warmer, or both. Often when I do classes with Tam, often she'll just bring a pink tone to the underneath, and I've got this added with water, so I'm just going to show you now, just adding just a light pink tone to the underneath. All over, and I'm using a wet brush or a damp brush with this. Okay, so remember that this is not, and I've got no hair on this girl, so just remember that the shadows fall a little bit differently when you've got hair. Okay, so now we've got our girl not looking quite so white. Okay, and she's just got that little bit of pink in her facial tone. Now, on top of that pink, even while it's wet, I've got a damp brush, right? And I'm using translucent colours now. So I'm not using strong colours, I'm using, have a look at these translucent colours, right? And I'm just going to add them in as shading at this point. So you can see here they're looking a bit yellow. But don't worry about that too much. Or if you don't intend to do that, then, you know, if you don't want to go as yellow, use this grey skin tone colour. But I'm just adding in some shading, and have a look how the translucent, and so like you can use your goldens for this, but I'm actually using Matisse, Derivan Matisse for both of those colours, just to give you an idea that you can use a number of different things. And you start setting up your shading just lightly, and this is a thing of layers, right? So we're setting it in, and we've got that damp brush, and we're just putting features in, because this is where I'm just going to have the light coming from the front. So this is where the white bit's going to be. We're going to have a little bit of dark under here. So again, you've now got some deeper shading, and you don't need to worry so much about actually then making this look perfect at every stage. That's not the aim. The aim then is actually to then cover it over again and start adding in. So I'm going to go back with that light flesh tone, right? So I'm not using any of my pre-mixed colours, and I'm just going to go over it again. I'm just going to dull some of those down and even out that skin tone. And if I think it looks too yellow or too orange, like, you know, my girls had an extremely bad spray tan, then I just add more pink into the mix. But what you get then is that kind of depth of colour, depth of layered look. So we've gone back to having not a lot there, but those will show. So now on that, because these blend, right? So I'm just dabbing off some of my water there and just making my brush a little bit drier. So now I'm going to use a different type of shadow and just bring that in. It's a light colour, but it just gives a little bit of a hint of depth of colour. And it is easily blendable. And that's that Jo Sonia skin tone base. And this is something that you could use as a base if you wanted to do that. I often find it looks a bit grey, and I like to start light and go darker. Okay? And bring that in. Now another colour that you can use, and I just need to find that, is often, well, I'm going to use it in a gouache, right? And it's a raw sienna. So I'm going to use it in a gouache, and you don't always need to use the same thing. This is what I love about mixed media. So I like this because it's translucent like those flows, and I'm just literally going to use a little bit of this, and I'm just going to bring that in. And I'm actually letting this mix with the acrylic paint. And now with an almost dry brush, I'm just going to blend it. So we start having that really cute look going as we blend the paint in. And then get that off the brush, and then just literally blend it out so that we have those lovely gradings starting to occur. Now, the reason that I'm not doing more realistic, this is some basic ideas to get you started, but to be honest with you, if I was going to do realistic facial tones and beautiful faces, that's a paid course. These courses are free, so I'm setting you on a path now for you to actually think seriously about what products you'll use and how you'll use them. So I'm now going to change to a smaller brush and just do a little bit around the nose and then wipe that off and just let the water blend out. And blend these out so you can see that she's got a little bit here in shadow on each side of her tiny nose. And at that time too, I'm going to get an antique white with a damp brush with a bit of water on it. So this is that antique white from up there. And while that's all still wet, I'm just going to put this pale spot, because when you do this, it creates that illusion of roundness. So the whole thing with blending this in is to then get your brush and blend out so that you can't see your transitions. There's no lines and that white is just blended out. And you can use watered down colours just to blend in your colours. I often do that, and then I go wash my brush and then just blend it back out again. Because not everybody has the same sort of facial shape or tone. And at this point I'm going to use a little bit of the white and a little bit of this peach. Right, and I'm just going to blend some into here, into the cheeks. While it's wet, and just allow that little bit of definition to continue to go. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of this skin tone again, and it's all about what you think works. Is that too brown? Do we dull it down again? You know, do we just, and that layer upon layer upon layer just really starts to interact with each other. And you dry your brush off and you start again. And there's your basic kind of face. Now she's pretty faceless at the moment because she's got no detail in the eyes. The nose is only, because she's a whimsy girl, right? She doesn't have a lot of detail. But if I was to just quickly do this, so we'll move to another part of the page here. So that's doing it with a variety of different paints and flesh tones and just pre-made colours that you might make. Right? If you're making a flesh tone colour, you will always start with an unbleached titanium for me, a little bit of peach, a little bit of a little bit of, you know, this skin flesh colour, a little bit of this, a little bit of peach, and a little bit of these colours here, and you just mix it up to something that you really like. And then you've got your mixed flesh tint up, and you can always start with that, and that's something that you prefer. Okay, so if we go down here, we'll just start another alright, so we've got another basic face, and we'll just get those out. Right, now this first layer that I pop down, I'm going to use a Neo colour. So I'm going to use a Neo colour crayon, and I'm just going to bring that over and see how vibrant that is. And I'm actually going to look like I'm shading it, and I'm just going to leave it really light in the middle and really focus the shades under here and here and here. But I am going to cover the whole face. But some of that will carry. So it looks a bit messy at the moment, but if you see how I do girls on my YouTube channel, they often start off a bit like this. Now instead of water to activate that, I'm actually going to activate it with gesso. And that will add and lighten that up. So I'm just going to look at adding in a little bit of watered gesso just from the lid. And this is Liquitex gesso, so it's very smooth and not chunky. I'm just going to take that out so that my brush is not too wet and blend it. And see how that colour is obviously lightening up, but I'm blending it with the gesso. Bit of gesso, bit of water. So not only do you seal your first layer like this, you mix it in and it's got a nice kind of colour. And it's not translucent. Has a little bit of depth to it already. And see, I didn't need to add it in. I've added some in. Some of it just dragged some of the colour and the gesso across where that nose area would be, because I didn't want the colour to actually be applied there, but I wanted it to be blended there. And there's your start on one that's actually being used for differently. And this is a really good start for letter journal pages where you just really want to blend it in, use a light touch, not use something really, really wet. And this could be your first layer. And you've sealed that in with the gesso. It's nice and creamy, and that's your first flesh colour. That's gone on that page is just that little bit buckled because this is like scratch paper. So I'll come back when that's dry. Okay. So the other one's still drying. It's not quite dry yet, but I just thought that I would show you a little bit about how you can layer these. So you might want to even your skin tone out by applying a little bit of pastel, a little bit of pencil. You need to be aware of the type of paper that you have. And I'm just using that flesh tone neo colour here because I find that I love to draw so much rather than just paint. And I love using my paint, but sometimes I don't even then reactivate these. I just leave them as they are. And I've still got that lovely nice little white highlight here, and all I want to do now is just add some more pink in pink here. Dark enough that I can just blend it, and it will blend in above, and she's going to get these lovely little pink cheeks. And you can also do those around the edge of the eye to increase with your shadows, because often we do have those sort of pinky shadows in that area. And then you can get some water and just make sure that none of it has a strong line, and it is, you're just feathering and blending that out. And then I can put a ball on the nose a la Tam, and just increase that up with a light brush. And there you have it. You have a little girl that you can now add some details into, and you know, you can do your eyes and your nose and your mouth. This bottom layer is not quite dry, but enough for me now to then go in and go, okay, well, I've got that first layer, so how about I just lightly shade in Going to use some of that Joe Sonia flesh tone. Going to do the same again. Not really make a big splash with a dark. And I could also use Prismacolor pencils at this point. I often do, but I'm not teaching on pencils today. This is colour blending with paint. But I wanted to show you one of the techniques I use, particularly with the neo colours, all the time. I use it all the time, particularly in my letter journals because I'm using thinner paper. I need a little bit of that skin tone base. And there are lots of different colours. I've got an Atelier skin grey yellowish. So I've got a toning grey yellowish, which I also really adore. So I'll just pop some of that out. And you can see that it's just that little bit different. You can see that's the skin tone base and that's the toning grey yellowish. And you can either mix those together, so you might want to lighten that up a bit and have a hybrid of the two so that you just gradually deepen those colours down. My trick with that is always wash it off, make it almost dry, and then go back in and blend. And there's less layers on that, but if I wanted her to use her a bit like that now, I'd wait until that dried and maybe just add a little bit of coloured pencil and voila, my girl would be done. Now, that is a quick technique that I use, and particularly if you don't want to make it really... See, this one has more layers in it and she's looking a lot more Lifetime. This is more like that darker kind of girl, and you just want to pop her into a letter journal or a little art journal page like I did the other day with these inspiration sticks. So I did a page, I just did a little girl, and originally when she first started out I'm sitting there going, oh, I don't know if she's going to work out, very greyish tones, but by the end of it she looked really cute. And, you know, of course these things look very different when you've got no eyes and the nose is not being done properly and the mouth's not finished. But today we were only looking at flesh tones. So that's what all I wanted to talk to you about, flesh tones. Remember those basic colours, and you need to think about, okay, so the basic colours that you've got, and you have a look at what brands are available to you. But I would start out with an unbleached titanium. I would also start out with something like a skin tone. Buy a couple of them. It's one of those things where you just need to, even different unbleached titaniums, there are different, there's two different unbleached titaniums, but I can tell you this one's lighter than that one. And you just mix them all up and you add a little bit of pink, you add a little bit of sienna or raw sienna, so that's an Australian sienna, that's a raw sienna. In the gouache, so you add a little bit of the raw sienna and a little bit of pink, and you start doing it as your base tone, but you still add all these other levels in, and that's basically how I do it. And I like that little bit of graininess. None of our faces are perfect, and that's the way that we roll. So I hope you've enjoyed the lesson today and the two really quick techniques just for doing some basic skin tones, and learn something new. I hope you've learned something new today, because I believe that it keeps you young. Ciao for now. Until next week for Technique Friday.